Welcome to the David Wells Experiment. I'm your host, David Wells, and let's just dive right into it. So, the David Wells Experiment. It's in the title. How'd I get that name? I think I mentioned it in first episode, but I can't remember exactly. Podcasting was something that I thought about doing for a while. I didn't know exactly how to. I almost started on another platform. I thought I might even have to pay like $20 a month to host it. Thank God I didn't do that. I was able to figure out how to get my podcast on Spotify, which is wild to think about. And I was able to execute it. So in that way, it was a success. I'm not famous like Joe Rogan, but I did something that only the top 1% of podcasters do. I was able to upload more than 21 episodes. And because I was brand new to it, I perhaps didn't know how to do things. But again, that's the thing about experiments. You learn, you make observations, and then you apply that. So that's why I started another podcast called the Hollywood Video Podcast. And it's not going to be my only one. There's going to be others, lots of others. As I've learned that a specific topic helps carry a podcast, who knows, I might have a bunch of different podcasts. I got the advice of choosing a topic, being consistent. But the one thing that I didn't really listen to was sticking with one thing. Because I've got ideas on lots of different things. So it's the one piece I'm going to have to say no to. But who knows, we'll see. Why did I think to call it the David Wells Experiment? Because, and I think I did mention this in the first episode, my dad would always tell me, "You're the experiment child." We didn't know anything about parenting, and so we tried out all our ideas on you and thought, okay, this works. This seems to work with him, all of them, some of them. Okay, this one thing seems to only work with him, so we'll just do this with him. So I thought it would be funny and ironic if I named my podcast that. And it sounds catchy. Just about the only thing I have in common with Joe Rogan, aside from being on Spotify and YouTube, is I have a podcast with my name in it and a word that begins with the letter E. Maybe in an alternate timeline, he called his podcast the Joe Rogan Experiment. Now it's the David Wells Experience. But yeah, we don't live in that timeline. I feel pretty happy about that I came up with the word experiment. And I did an interesting experiment, maybe two if you think about it. So, I'm sure some of you might know that my real name isn't David Wells. Well, that depends on how do you define real. But yeah, my parents had always intended to name me David. They were going to put that on the legal documents, but then of course my uncle decides to tell everybody, "Oh yeah, it's a boy. His name is Robert Davis Chisholm Wells." And he just said that as a joke. But there was one great grandparent who saw that his last name was in there, and they didn't have the heart to tell him that it wasn't true. So they decided as a compromise, they would put my legal name as Robert Davis Chisholm Wells, and they would put that on the legal documents and they would just call me David. Some people think that it comes from part of my middle name, Davis, but as my mom said, it was always David from the Bible, King David. And I think I like David more than Robert. David means worthy to be loved. Robert means bright and glorious. Even without trying to, me just explaining the name meanings just sounds so self-aggrandizing and obnoxious. But I'm just saying that's what the names mean. I guess it's anyone's call if either of those two apply to me. But anyway, yeah, so I get called David forever, and really the only time that I ever started to get called Robert was when I started to work at Chick-fil-A. Actually, my operator at the time, he was the only one who called me David, but because everybody else was calling me Robert, I'm like, you might as well just do that. So I came up with it in my mind, the idea of like, maybe this is a way of separating work and outside of work. That you just get called Robert at work and you get called David outside of that. That'll be good. Or so I thought. So for years, it really didn't present any problems, or I don't know. I don't think there were any problems. I don't think there are, but so much stuff happens in life. And I basically kind of think of Robert and David as really two different personas. I mean, they're all basically me, but Robert is basically, he grinds at work. He can just, even my coworkers are like, how are you outside in the lobby all day for so many hours? I couldn't do that. And even my job is kind of viewed as a penance. Nobody wants to go out in the lobby, but that's sort of my default setting. It's where I'm at. And I work long hours. I work about 40 at Chick-fil-A, and then I work maybe 16 or 20 at Freddy's. So I average anywhere from 50 to 60 hours a week. And so, yeah, everybody's nice at work. Some people have actually left who I wasn't a fan of. I'm not going to say who, but there was one individual who left at the start of the year who we were friends, but said individual said very hurtful things and just made it difficult to be around said individual. And they left. And I almost did, but then I thought, okay, maybe things could be better. But there were still some people there who they just soured my mood. One person who just really felt indifferent towards life and just was like, oh my gosh, and just felt like she hated people. And even just talking about it is like, the crazy thing is nobody else seemed to have a problem with this person. And I'm like, okay, is it just me, or does this person seem to just hate people? And why are they at Chick-fil-A if they do? And the other individual was somebody who seemed very incelish. Like, they could be nice, but they had very specific opinions about men and women. And this individual wasn't doing anything didn't seem like to try to better himself, and just kind of wanted to shelve the responsibility on other people. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can deal with this. Like, sort of the whole mantra is like, my life has this consistent theme of just endure. there's so much of that in my life, especially the last 24, 25 years. I've had to live by that a lot. I've had to piece everything back together when stuff happened to make it fall apart. And even though I wasn't responsible, I've had to pick up the pieces and make sure everybody's okay. And while these other two individuals are still at my job, again, I'm not going to name them. I see this meme on Instagram or Facebook. It says that people's moods are contagious. And I'm like, man, it's like I'm trying to be better, but I don't want their moods. And it was a thing that made me wonder, how long do I really want to be here? And so then after having been run by corporate for a while, we get a new operator. She interviews everybody and kind of looks like everybody at my store is going to get kept on. I don't anticipate anybody leaving or not being rehired. But then lo and behold, as the new operator officially takes over, I notice that all of the people that I had issues with, they're gone. And I'm like, oh, wow. And it's one of those things I try to not be like, oh, thank God they're gone. But I'm like, I feel the more diplomatic attitude to have is, it's a shame that their departure is cause for me to celebrate because we just didn't align properly. And I put up with them for a long time. Now, why did I go on this? I wouldn't say it's a diatribe, not even a rant. It's just that's the character of Robert. Not very expressive, not creative. He's not the one with the ideas, the inspiration. He just shows up and he works. And any time that David is the opposite, he's the one that comes up with weird ideas, stories, concepts, things that other people don't, or that other people wouldn't think of. And yeah, he's the artist. And so I kept those personalities basically separate at work. I mean, I'm sure that people from work and people from outside of work, if they ever crisscross, they'll see I'm largely similar. But I had this really unfortunate epiphany that I've had to go through so much that I feel like the mechanisms in my brain are like kind of jacked up. Like, especially recently, I thought at the start of the year that I was going to take a long, well-deserved break. I had accrued enough money to where I didn't have to work for a very long time. And I'd spent so much time working towards that. But then some big emergencies happened and I had to spend all of my money. And even before I could just go back to work, I still had to, where I would have gone back to work a long time ago and just tried to minimize the loss, I wasn't able to. The emergency demanded that of me. And so that made it all the more difficult when I finally did go back to work. There was just a lot of recovery and stabilizing things. And I was so angry. And it was one of those things where I basically just had to shut the valve on my anger off. But it wasn't just the anger that I think kind of got turned off. It was like my other emotions suffered, like the reward circuitry for my brain just got changed. It was like, oh, if I do this, then this will happen. It was just kind of for a long time, oh, I'm doing this, but this is going to happen. So why am I doing this? Doesn't matter. You just have to do it anyway. Otherwise, things will just be worse. And this might be a bit too heavy for some people, but I don't know if I'm depressed or not. But I was seriously disincentivized to keep going forward. There were some moments where, I'm riding on my bike and I'm thinking, what if I just did steer it the wrong way? All this could stop and I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But of course, my better judgment said, that would be remarkably selfish of you. There are people who need you. Maybe when there are people who don't need you anymore, you can think about that. But it'd be really selfish. One of the ideas that kept me from doing that is this happened the last time I actually was thinking of this. Within the last 2 years, I've become an uncle. I think I've got, as of the podcast, a niece and nephew who I think are 2 and 3 respectively. Or I don't know, but anyway, I remember one time when I was really in a dark mood, I said, okay, just wait until they're both in college. Maybe then you can think about it again, but just wait until then. And I haven't really contended with that thought. And I realized that I've basically just been nothing but Robert. And because I work a lot, I'm trying to catch up. There are 2 people who really helped me out, who, if they didn't, I'd be absolutely cooked. One of them is my dad, Keith, and the other a friend from church, Gilbert. Shout out to both of them. So anyway, I finally got some breathing room and I started to feel not so bad. One of the things that happened was I used to make movies all the time up until about 2017. And even though from like 2020 to 21, I sort of forced myself to make something, I just lost the sort of mechanism to be able to keep doing that. And I even shot something last year and I started to edit it. And I'm so sorry to the actors that I haven't finished it, but I thought I got back the ability to make movies, but just the emotion wasn't there. And I still got that project as of this recording on my laptop and I haven't touched it. And I'm going to force myself to make it. But in some ways, I kind of feel like maybe this will be my last movie. And then another part is saying, this can't be your last one. But I'm like, well, will I ever have the heart for it again? It's been years developing that talent. And I'm just like, I don't know. And so I realized I just don't really feel much of anything anymore. Maybe that's depression. I don't know. And one of the things that I felt was so noticeable was I feel like the mechanism in me, the mechanism that allows me to fall in love, to be infatuated with someone, that also feels damaged. So there's all these damaged circuits in me that just don't quite work the way they're supposed to. And I didn't know how to fix any of them. Really, the only thing that I can think of is work so much, get so far ahead in money and bills and payments that, you can have some discretionary funds so that you're not forced to think about that all the time. And I really had to fight dark thoughts for the last couple years. First there was in 2020 COVID and the pandemic and all that. You couldn't just brush aside stuff. They forced you to think about it. You didn't have a choice. And then the war in Ukraine, Russia said some spicy stuff, which really got me concerned. And then, of course, October 7th and with Israel and Hamas, that really got my thinking. And yeah, so some stuff that happened was the first step that I took towards like trying to correct my thinking was I unfollowed so many people on Instagram. What's funny is there are people who perhaps theologically, politically, philosophically, I might agree with on a great number of things. But all they did was hit the panic button on me. And so I'm like, okay, I can't deal with that. I have a life to live. I have responsibilities. People depend on me. So I can't indulge. I can't engage that. And so what happens next? Next thing that happens is I realize, people want your attention for a reason. And sometimes it's for noble purposes, but sometimes it's to sell you something. And I realized we're an attention economy, and the thumbnails and the titles and videos and posts, they're designed to make you want to click. Where there might be, say, a thumbnail on YouTube with a giant bomb exploding over America, and it says, the truth that the government doesn't want you to know, America's greatest threat. And you're like, well, what's the truth they don't want me to know? What's the greatest threat? There's a bomb in the thumbnail. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? You click because you want an answer. And they basically succeeded. And they're like, we're going to tell you what the government doesn't want you to know. But first, do you need earbuds that don't fall out of your ears and provide great audio? Well, thanks to today's sponsor, Raycon, you won't have that problem ever again. And now back to the video. Yeah. And maybe it's not something, I don't know. I think this was best exemplified in the early days of the Ukraine war. I think on CNN or something, there was live footage of the air sirens and air raids going on. And then they immediately cut to a commercial break for Chili's. And like, come try our new menu item, the whatever it is, and back to the war. It's like they're a business and they've got to make money. And what better way to do that than to hit your amygdala and be like, guys, it's so dangerous. And I became very aware of people putting the word breaking news. Because like, well, what's the breaking news? And it could be something like Putin threatens like tougher measures, or Hamas declares war on the West, or Kim Kardashian got her butt enlarged, or they would use breaking news for all those sorts of things. It's like, and I'm like, I started to develop a certain level of skepticism if somebody said breaking news, because it's just a way to activate your amygdala, the flight or fight, and get your attention. And I really think that went to a whole new level in 2020. Certainly there was some legitimacy. Certainly there was stuff we had to be aware of in 2020. Some stuff was ignored too much. Some stuff was overblown too much. But basically confirmed that the internet had created a giant button that could be pressed and we'd all panic. And that got to me. So, yeah, there was a lot that facilitated just kind of the mechanisms in my brain not working properly. And I just couldn't feel right. I mean, thank God for church. That helped me out so much. It was one of the few places where the amygdala would just sort of shut down on its own. And I started to feel good enough to a point where I tried to make a movie, and then I just lost any passion for it. I feel like the actors are going to be so disappointed when they see it because I fell out of love with the project, and I feel like I'm going to do it just to get it done. And all I can say is sorry. I can't help the way I feel. And one of the things I realized was that that's the nature of the two differing personas. David is nothing but feeling. Well, that's not true. I do have, I've got mechanisms in my brain that allow me to contend with that. I'm sure there's certainly a spiritual component to that, very much a God thing. But Robert, all he does is go to work, grind away, and doesn't feel much of anything. Just deals and contends with things. And I realized one of the things that's perpetuated kind of just this slump of mine is I realized I get called Robert way more than I get called David because I'm at work so much more often than I am outside of work. I basically live at work. I hear the name Robert, like, Robert, hey, where's Robert at? Hey, Robert, can you do this? Hey, Robert, can you do that? And I just have to be, yeah. I remember one thing that really emphasized the fact that I couldn't feel was during COVID, some guy got very verbally aggressive with me and I got verbally aggressive back, and I got chastised for standing up for myself. Like, well, this dude is being just awful. It's like, that doesn't matter. How dare you? You represent Chick-fil-A. And it was like, so he just gets to treat me like that? And I couldn't quit. I couldn't leave. I had to put up with it because other people needed me. They depended on me. Would have been great if I could have walked away, but I just had to deal with it. Though kind of feels like whenever problems happen, it's like I'm the one who swoops in and rescues people. And when I ask for help, they're like, well, what do you want to spend your money on? And I'm like, well, that's up to me. I want to be able to have to not worry about money. And yeah, like sometimes I just don't feel like a priority to a lot of people. And that's just, yeah, I just lean in deep to that. And maybe it's because I leaned in deep to that I just really, I started to, I never used to think of calling myself Robert, but I started to have that idea in my head of like, where my inner voice started to think of myself that way. I'm like, that's not good. And who knows, maybe it does come back to the nature of the said names, Robert meaning bright and glorious, and David meaning worthy to be loved. I bet a lot of people don't know the meanings of those names. And so I had to be the bright and glorious one, but maybe you're bright and glorious because you just deal with so much. And I wanted to be the one that's worthy to be loved. So, fun little detour. There's this K-pop group called Girls' Day, And they have this song where the chorus of the song is just them saying darling, darling over and over again. And one of the translations for David is, of course, worthy to be loved, but also darling. So just to inflate my own ego, I'd be like, oh, they're singing about me. So anyway, I had this epiphany. And then I'm like, I need to be called David much more than I do Robert. Or at the very least, tip the scale somewhat. So I had this idea. There's maybe a couple people at my job who seem like they could be friends, people I could actually see myself being outside of work with, or people who actually listen to this podcast. So I got the idea of like, okay, you can't ask everybody at work to start calling you David. I mean, I could, and they probably wouldn't have a problem with that. But here's the thing, I don't know if I would, because if I just make the name David, if I put it in the context of work and it gets treated like the same name as Robert, then David just also becomes that sort of grind monster that just all he does is work and doesn't feel. Yeah, I'd be stuck in the same problem. So I had the idea of, okay, select a couple people and tell them I'd prefer you to call me David. So I made that first request to someone yesterday, and it was cool. I wound up feeling different from the effect. I was like, this is surprising. And an odd consequence was I actually felt a little dizzy, and I had to take a ibuprofen or a Tylenol or something. And then I asked again today another friend at work, and I felt good at the same time, but also that same thing happened. And then after that happened, said individual said, bye, David. And I kind of felt something. And I'm like, if ever there was a reason for me to leave work, it would be so I don't have to deal with the mantle, the persona of being the unfeeling one. Because that can't be helpful for you. So to make it just a bit more bearable, I found at least a couple people who can ask to call me David. And in keeping with the title of this podcast, that is an experiment. And who knows, maybe there'll be more people I can ask, but I've got to keep the balance, because if it just becomes the same name as Robert, then I've dug myself into a hole. You can probably guess, if you're listening, I've got problems. Yeah, I don't doubt that I do. Funny thing is, I feel like it would be a miracle if I could fix the thing in me that makes me, if I could go back to, oh man, I want to make movies. I want to make stuff again. I want to make movies. I've got this project. I'm going to pull everybody together and we're going to get it done. And that would be astounding. If I could have that old flame, that old zeal, I feel like I would be fixed. Because I went through so much stuff before, between 2001 and 2017, that shook me to my core, and my desire to make movies went unchanged. I don't know why it was stuff in 2017 and 2018 that just shook me. I can imagine why everything that happened in 2021, 22, and 23 just made things worse. But this kind of feels like a step in the right direction. And I'd hope that I don't have to work so hard, so much, for that much longer. But yeah, just step up and make a game change. I will say this too. Something that really helps is in 2024, I got to start meeting Power Ranger actors, and that's continued this year. And I cry like a baby in front of all of them. It doesn't matter, with the exception of one. If I meet an OG Power Ranger actor, the tears are going to start flowing. And yeah, that feels oddly cathartic and healing. And I kind of got to wonder what happened to my mind so much that that's the thing it is. But yeah. So anyway, this has been the David Wells Experiment. Have an absolutely super day. I hope all your dreams come true, and I will see you later. Bye.